Hey everyone, Fear Crawler here. Welcome to the video. 90% of you that voted on the Twitter poll said that you would like to see a compilation video of some of the past stories I have read. These aren't new stories, but some of you may be hearing them here for the first time. I do hope you'll enjoy. Like most kids in college, I had no clue what I wanted to do with my life. Guidance counselors and high school teachers drilled into you that college was extremely important, and where we went would impact our future. I always thought that it was unusual that they expected you to make huge life decisions so young in life. However, I knew I wanted to work in medicine, so while I was in school I studied to become an EMT. 4 months and $1,000 later, I finally had my license to practice. I sent application after application to as many companies, hospitals, and fire stations around my school as I could, and after many failures, I finally secured a job. It was at a company 15 miles from campus, but I didn't care. I just wanted to work. Being an EMT was pretty uneventful, to be honest. I go to school in western Massachusetts, so outside of campus, it's farmland and mountains for miles. I expected horrible accidents and disastrous medical traumas, and me being the strong medic saving the day. Instead, I mostly ended up with Grandma calling 911 about a soreness in her left foot or some drunk kid who sprained his ankle walking on ice. I wanted action, excitement, but I was essentially a glorified taxi service. Everything changed one night when my partner Kevin and I got a call late into our 16-hour shift. It was 2 a.m. when Kevin and I finished a call where a man called with complaints of a headache. We'd been running call after call and we just wanted to get out of there. After ruling out the obvious life threats like a stroke or heart attack, we learned that he hadn't drank anything all day. After some ibuprofen and water, lo and behold, his pain miraculously disappeared. After loading up all of our equipment into the ambulance, we made our way back to the station, looking forward to a rest after non-stop calls. But then we got a call from dispatch.
Ambulance 1, we have a report of a man wandering around. Possible altered mental status. Over.
Just when I thought we could get a break for once. Copy that, dispatch. We're en route now. ETA 10 minutes. Over. Kevin and I rolled our eyes and sighed. Like I said before, my ambulance company was in the boonies, so I had no idea why this guy would be wandering around in the middle of the night. Probably just a drunk guy with a broken down car. When we got to the scene, we did a quick scan and didn't see anything. The anonymous caller had reported a ragged-looking man stumbling around an intersection. It was an empty stretch of highway surrounded by open fields on both sides without a building or house for miles. I didn't see any cars, parked or driving, but that didn't surprise me since it was 2 a.m. My partner and I spent another 10 minutes searching, but we didn't see anything abnormal. I was thinking that maybe this guy had fixed his car or got a ride. However, leaving the scene before I was sure would be considered abandonment, so I had to be completely certain. Before I managed to call dispatch, Kevin stopped in his tracks and looked out onto the field. "Hey Steve," he whispered, keeping his previously moving beam of light fixed on one point. "I think I see someone." I squinted and shined my flashlight, trying my best to see this phantom man. "Are you sure, Kev? It could have been a My flashlight landed on something about 200 yards away. What I saw really confused me. It looked like a man, but he was just standing in the middle of the field. His back was turned to us and he wasn't moving, just standing. There was absolutely nothing around him. The ambulance had its lights on and we must have been here for 20 minutes now, so he must have known we were here. "Hey buddy, you okay?" I shouted, waving my arm. He didn't move. Something didn't seem right. We must have had our lights on him for a few minutes, and in that time he hadn't moved at all. I got this horrible sinking feeling in my stomach and I turned to Kevin. "Kev, let's go check it out. He could be hurt." I turned around and noticed that Kevin had become extremely pale. He was clutching his flashlight and his eyes were fixed on the man. We've been partners since I started a few months ago and I've never seen him like this. Even at gruesome car accidents, he would act cool and collected and would even crack a few jokes afterwards. Now though, he looked as if he'd seen a ghost. "I'm going to call dispatch. We might need some backup," he stammered, barely above a mumble. "What are you talking about?" I asked. But I noticed that he had already started making his way back to the ambulance. In class, it was drilled into us that scene safety was above all else. If we felt threatened, we should never enter a scene. After all, one patient is always better than two. From what I could tell, it just looked like a man was standing in an open field, in the middle of the night, by himself. Yeah, it was creepy, but it didn't seem dangerous. Alarms were going off in my head, but not the kind that indicated danger. I went against all of my training and better judgment and slowly made my way towards this man. I had to slowly walk through this marshy field with my foot sinking in a few inches with each step. Every fiber, every instinct kept telling me to turn around as I got closer and closer. Each step felt heavier and heavier as I approached him. The only sound around was the steady thump of my jump kit bumping against my leg with each step. While not a seasoned EMT, I had gotten good at telling a person's state of health as I approached him. But this was different. I had kept my flashlight trained on him the entire time and he still hadn't moved. His head was still turned to me as I made my way there. Immediately, a rotten stench filled my nostrils and I nearly gagged. I've been around dead bodies, but none had smelled this foul. If it had been a body, it would have been dead for weeks. I trudged on and called out to him through my gags. "Sir, are you okay?" Still nothing. Now that I was closer, I was able to make out more details. He wore a tattered brown t-shirt that hung loosely on his lanky frame. Long tears on his shirt revealed pale skin. Sickly skin. His legs were covered by an old pair of blue jeans that had dark brown stains up and down each leg. He wasn't wearing any shoes and his feet were probably buried in a few inches of mud. "Sir," I asked. Nothing. I looked down and gasped at what I saw. This man was standing in front of the mutilated corpse of a deer. This disemboweled deer's organs lay scattered around, with its intestines hanging loosely from its open chest cavity. My body finally caved from the combination of the smells and sights. I leaned over and vomited my dinner all over my steel-toed boots. I slowly stood back up and noticed that this man's shoulders were moving up and down. It looked like he was laughing. His shoulders moved up and down almost in response to some untold joke. After a few seconds of this strange movement, I finally heard what sounded like faint laughter. This faint laugh, however, soon turned into a bellowing laugh that caused his shoulder blades to rise up and down rapidly. His laughing continued as he slowly rotated until his front faced me. By this point, his laughter was deafening. I picked up my flashlight that I had dropped and recoiled at what met my sight. This man had a grin that looked painfully stretched from ear to ear. However, his teeth, if you could call them that, were what shocked me. Yellow, dagger-like teeth occupied the space where normal humans have their teeth. Each of his rotted teeth jutted out at awkward angles, managing to look even more menacing. My human instincts overtook my professional ones and I took a step back. He stepped forward. His laughter continued as I slowly backed up. He was mirroring my movements, almost mocking me. I turned around and ran as fast as I could. The field was muddy, so I slid forward with each step. I could hear his deafening laughter and the sound of his thundering footsteps right behind me. Each step I took, he matched it. I could feel and smell his sickening breath on the back of my neck. I kept my eyes straight, refusing to look back at the monstrosity chasing me. Inevitably, I lost my footing and slid about 5 feet forward. Before I could roll over, I looked up and was blinded by a bright light. The laughter seemed to stop immediately as my eyes adjusted to see that Kevin and a police officer had found me. I rolled over and immediately expected the insane monster to pounce on me, but nothing was there. The police officer looked around the field but found nothing. He saw the deer, but he told me that some animal had probably killed it and was probably spooked by us approaching and left. I tried to talk to Kevin about what I saw, but he refused to listen. Every time I would bring it up, he would immediately change the subject. I quit shortly after this incident. Call it PTSD, call it nerves, I don't care. I just couldn't work in EMS anymore after that. I think I'm slowly going crazy. I sometimes see him when I drive, but just out in the distance. Whenever I manage to look, he or whatever it is already gone. I can't drive at night anymore, and I avoid travel when possible. Sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep, I hear his laughter. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. That couldn't have been him following me home from class. That's just crazy. It couldn't possibly be him standing outside of my window, right? This was the first time I've dealt with something that I couldn't understand. Before all this happened, I never believed that unexplainable things could occur, but now I'm certain that the supernatural is true. This story happened right after I started this job. My supervisor and I were at our office doing paperwork when we received a call from a middle-aged lady who claimed there was a strange female at her apartment. Naturally, we had to investigate her claim and help her if possible. We rushed to her apartment and arrived right around 6:30 p.m. The lady was waiting for us outside, afraid of entering her apartment. My superior asked her a couple of questions and learned that she had always felt as if someone was observing her. She also said that as soon as she noticed she was not alone, she ran to the door and locked it to keep whoever it was inside. After we were done with questioning her, we opened the door and attempted to investigate the scene. The apartment was so small and the windows were barred, which meant that there was no room for someone to hide or escape. We searched every corner of the house and found no trace of an intruder. Nonetheless, I had a strange feeling that someone was watching me. I felt as if there was someone walking with my superior and I, unseen by either of us. Anyway, we had one more place to search before leaving, her bedroom. I was searching her closet before I felt someone creeping on me, so I turned around immediately and pointed my firearm at them. To my relief, it was the lady. Despite our orders not to enter, she followed us. I should point out that unlike when we found her outside, she was unusually calm this time. We checked with her and nothing was stolen, thankfully. It was about time we left this creepy place, but before leaving, my superior asked her to seek professional help because she might be having some mental issues. Here's the crazy part. 2 weeks after this strange business, we received a call from the same lady again. Her voice was strange on the phone, but she kept repeating, "Please help me," and then hung up the phone. Though we suspected she might be imagining things like the last time, we decided it was better to confirm her claims. So we reached her apartment a little after 9 p.m. and stormed in. The first place we checked was her bedroom, and to our surprise, we found her body. I called the ambulance as fast as possible while my superior examined her corpse. The creepiest part is that she had been dead for a while. Though I may be inexperienced, my superior has seen enough dead bodies to know that she was dead long before she called us. It didn't appear to be a murder because there were no signs of a struggle. It took the ambulance 10 minutes to arrive and we got a second opinion. She had been dead for a week now, but the cause of death was unknown. My superior was far calmer than I was, but he was still in a state of disbelief. We decided not to discuss this incident ever again. And to this day, I shiver whenever I remember this particular incident. Although it was definitely the first, it wasn't the last strange occurrence I've ever run into over the course of this job. I'm a police officer, but that's as far as I'll go with my identity. No places, people, or any identifiable personal information. It's the only way I can protect myself. I work in a city on what we call the shift. I spend most of my time policing a suburb. It's a pretty average place, has its good streets and bad, the occasional suspicious death and some low-level gang problems, but nowhere near as widespread as other areas. I've been a cop for 9 years and my partner at the moment is a female officer just in her first year of duty. We'll call her Jan for now. So 16 days ago I'm walking alongside a river in the area. It's broad daylight. No one's really around, but we check the riverside occasionally, because a few junkies hang out there sometimes, and I'm never comfortable with that, because there's a school just a few streets away. So I walk down there with Jan to see if any of the usuals are there to move them on, but the place is dead. Really quiet. It's not a big river. In fact, it's more like a canal and a path goes along it where people can fish or cycle. Jan spotted it first. A boat coming down the water. The problem was that it was clearly unmanned, scraping along the river's edge. It was unusual, but I had seen this happen once before. Some old drunk had left his boat and not tied it up properly. I assumed something similar had happened. Anyway, it can be dangerous, obviously, for other boats. And if it had got damaged and sank, then we'd have to close off the river as a hazard. I'm a pretty fast runner and thought straight away that I could get to the boat as long as it was near the path. I bolted quickly. Poor Jan could hardly keep up. But as I got to the boat, something caught my eye. A smear of blood on a window. I was lucky. The boat was near enough, so I jumped on board and threw the rope attached to the front of the hull to Jan, who had finally caught up. There was a wooden post a few meters away and she quickly tied the rope to it. The boat juddered slightly, but it stopped easily. Jan jumped aboard and I pointed the blood out to her right away. She looked uncomfortable, but that's to be expected from someone without experience, and the fact that the area was really quiet. I'd go as far as to say there was a bit of an eerie atmosphere. The boat was about 30 feet long and it was clear that there were 2 cabins, one on top for whoever drove the boat, and probably a small room underneath to sleep in, maybe even a tiny kitchen area. I peered into the driver's cabin, but it was dark inside, so I couldn't see a thing. I walked around the back and found the door open. There was a smell of oil or paraffin, and while the cabin was empty, it was clear that there had been some sort of a struggle. The floor was littered with books that had been knocked off of a shelf. I could see the blood on the window and droplets leading back out of the room. Jan was now behind me as we followed the trail to a hatch at the back of the boat. I shouted first to see if anyone was below, but I got no response. I may be experienced, but I'm never crazy about going into a confined space with God knows who hiding there. It was dark below and I pulled out my torch to get a proper view as I went down the stairs. I could hear Jan's nervous breath above as I called it in. There on the floor were 2 bodies. I'm no forensics expert, but it was clear that they had killed one another. One body lay on top. The man underneath had shoved a large kitchen knife under the ribs of what looked like to be his attacker. Death must have been quick, but not quick enough. The man on top had plunged a weapon into his victim's neck. It looked similar to a screwdriver with a pointed tip, but gave me the impression that it was for killing, the point protruding from the side. Both men had then died, almost impaled together, and the smell of blood, which you never get used to, was horrific, as both men had bled out over the entire cabin floor. Look, I don't mean to sound thoughtless, but while this whole thing was creepy as hell and brutal, you come to expect finding dead bodies as a cop to a degree. What I didn't expect was the response. I had called it in over the radio reporting a suspected double homicide, but we have procedures for these sort of things. A medical team. We're not allowed to pronounce someone dead even if it's obvious. Forensics, etc. None of them showed. Instead, a group of what seemed to be plainclothed police appeared and took over immediately. 4 cars full of them to be precise. Their IDs were all in order, but nothing like this had ever happened before. I don't want to identify the region I work, so all I'll say is that the officers from my country's intelligence agency then appeared and made myself and Jan sign a bunch of documents. You're going to think that this is crazy, but I didn't read them. I don't know what happened, but I had this desire to just get away from that boat and from those 2 corpses. Sometimes you just feel in your gut that you're in danger, and that's what I felt. We were specifically told that under legislation, which to be fair to them I am aware of, that this was now a matter of national security. If either me or Jan spoke a word of this to anyone, we could go to jail. We left as quickly as we could. So why am I writing all of this then? Why am I putting my career in jeopardy? Because I'm angry. I can deal with the fact that I know that I'm being watched. I've seen the same couple of people shadowing me in different locations at different times. Too much of a coincidence. I can also deal with the fact that Jan has transferred to another station and won't return my calls. That's fair enough. She's young and has worked hard to be a cop. She doesn't want to lose that. But there are some things I can't deal with. I can't deal with visiting my ex-wife and finding what looks suspiciously like an electronic bug in my 5-year-old daughter's room, inside a light fitting that was playing up. I also can't deal with the memory of those corpses. The looks on their faces were different to me from what I've seen before. I keep having nightmares about them. It was as if their faces were frozen in hatred, but it was more than that. Looking back, playing it over in my head, it seems clear to me now. The blood wasn't dripping from the driver's cabin to the hatch, but from the hatch to the cabin after those 2 men were dead. Someone else was on that boat, and I'm convinced whoever it was left that trail into the driver's cabin deliberately. There was something in there I was supposed to see, but I just can't think what it could have been. I'm submitting this now, and you can disregard it as fake or whatever. I just felt like maybe if I talked about this, I could get a good night's sleep. have been a member of the New South Wales Police Force for 33 years, and what I witnessed on this night was something I know I will never get rid of from my mind, and will most likely be with me until the day I die. It was about 2:25 a.m. on a quiet Thursday evening, and my shift was ending at 3 a.m., which meant I was in a good mood as the shift had been relatively easy. That was until I was assigned to a job to investigate reports of screaming and distressed cries of help from a property surrounded by bushland. Now, the calls to investigate this property were frequent, and I assumed it would go as it always did. I would arrive with my flashing blue and red lights, no sirens, and drive down the driveway to witness a rather large house surrounded by dense bush and trees. No lights would be visible as the house was unoccupied due to the owners going missing a few years earlier. I told my partner Matthew, not his real name, that we had been called to the house again. "Let's go there, find nothing, and report back," he said, grabbing his hat and gulping down the last of his lukewarm tea. Fast forward 20 minutes to 2:45 a.m., and we arrived at the gates which separated the already hidden house from the road. We slowly drove down the long driveway, observing the trees on either side of us to ensure all was calm. It was silent. There was no action of any sort on the driveway, and we found nothing at the house. At least that's what we thought would happen. On this night, there was an eerie feeling creeping up on us as we drew closer to the house. Matthew was ready to radio our commanding officer the news that nothing was amiss, until we arrived at the other side of the driveway. The house stood there, silent and proud, shrouded as always, yet, unlike the other times here, there was a light on in the living room. We ensured our tasers were ready to go in the event of an aggressive intruder, and got out of the police car, leaving the headlights on and pointed at the house.
"The front door is locked and no windows appear to be damaged,"
Matthew whispered, eyeing the single light in the living room. We simultaneously approached the front door and knocked with a heavy thud. Nothing. We knocked a second time, hoping the occupants didn't hear the first knock, and still there was nothing. This is where it gets creepy. Upon knocking for a third time, Matthew went stiff as a statue and began shaking. "What? What can you see?" I stopped. I could feel goosebumps forming on my arms. Peering out a window from the second floor was a person. A woman wearing a white gown was staring down at us. We couldn't see her clearly as the window was foggy, but we knew it was a woman, aged around 21. Matthew was petrified, and I can't blame him for being so. I called out to the woman and demanded she open the front door. She stared for a few more moments and turned around and walked off. We could hear footsteps coming down the rickety staircase on the other side of the door, and braced ourselves to stand face to face with the woman. Then it all went silent as it once was. Matthew put a hand on his radio and notified the commander that there was a possible intruder and we needed an extra car as support. Before the commander answered, an almighty bang ricocheted through the house. It sounded like a gunshot, so Matthew and I hightailed it back to the car and took cover behind it against the trunk. Matthew turned his head to me, looking back at the house as more bangs followed. I was texting my wife that there were possible gunshots and that I loved her.
Paul, you need to look now,"
Matthew said to me. The fear was amplified through his voice as he said this. I slowly peeked around the side of the car and almost shrieked at what I saw. The living room light was off, but now the entire second floor was illuminated by a green light. A bright green light. We studied it, slowly calming ourselves and reassuring one another that backup was coming. The banging stopped, and when we were ready, we ventured very slowly back towards the house, almost crawling. As we got to the front porch, we heard another sound. Not a footstep or a loud bang. This sound was a blood-curdling scream that has stuck with me to this day. We couldn't wait any longer for backup. We breached the front door, guns drawn, and followed the source of the screaming together. We dare not split up in a place like this. Not tonight. We went upstairs ever so slowly, not blinking and hyper-vigilant of our surroundings. The green light was coming from the room where we saw the woman. As I neared the door, Matthew bumped a vase and it fell with a loud crack. The second it hit the ground, we heard a male voice yelling to us.
"Hey, what are you doing here?"
He yelled.
"My name is Senior Constable Cooper of the Junior Police. Show yourself,"
I yelled firmly.
"You have no idea what you have stumbled across, Senior Constable,"
the man said, thumping something, prompting more screams. I said nothing and readied myself for the other side. I gave the door one hard kick and it came tumbling down. Inside was a circle of blood, 15 to 20 green candles, and a white gown that looked brand new. There was no sign of anyone in the room at that time, and we were certain the screams and talking came from here. "What is this?" I said, once again turning to face Matthew. But Matthew was nowhere to be seen. "Matthew! Matthew!" I called a dozen times to no avail. I could hear sirens in the distance, and as I looked out the window, I could see distinct red and blue flashing lights through the trees. Backup was here, but Matthew was not. For the next 35 minutes, I searched the house from top to bottom for Matthew with the 3 officers that had just arrived. I ventured down into a cellar under the kitchen and found something that haunts me to this day. Matthew's credentials, identifying him as a member of the New South Wales Police, as well as his gun, and 3 bloody fingers placed neatly on the ground. I screamed at the top of my lungs for the other officers to come to me and call for forensics, and virtually everyone available at the time. By the time I got home, it was 5:30 a.m. and the sun was rising. Matthew was never seen again, nor did forensics find any trace of him. The fingers found were identified as his. 2 of them were. The 3rd was unknown and remains unknown to this day. It took me 45 minutes after getting home to decide to resign effective immediately. It's been almost 10 years since that night, and I still hear the screams of that woman and the distinct voice that warned me in that house. Please, if you ever hear screaming in the middle of the night, call the proper law enforcement. Do not venture by yourself to investigate. I'm a paramedic in the southern United States. I've been involved in emergency medical services and the volunteer fire service since I was a senior in high school. So at the point this story was told, 7 years of it. In that time, I had seen some really strange and frightening events, some of which I couldn't explain. I was also aware that I had a lot of exposure to violence, both towards my patients and towards myself. I've been punched, kicked, bitten, plowed through by mental patients trying to get out of an involuntary hold, cut, and even stabbed with a used needle by a jerk who didn't like I took his blood for the police after a DUI incident. But this incident was by far the most disturbing, not only for what happened to me and could have happened to my partner, but for the events that preceded it and the fact that seemingly nothing was done after. In November 2011, I was working for a very large, nationally renowned ambulance company, for which I no longer work for. While I won't name the company, I will say that they will cease to exist in 30 days because of a merger with another very large ambulance company. We had the contract to provide 911 service for a predominantly rural county in western Tennessee, and it was a fun gig. 1 call a day usually, and usually really sick or injured patients. The kind of stuff you love being a paramedic for. Lots of drugs and domestic violence related calls as well. That night it was particularly miserable, rainy and just dark. The local 911 office had received a call about an assault, and now the deputies were calling for us to come assist them. The call came out as a woman down, unresponsive, and we flipped on our lights and sirens and headed that way. Paramedics generally work with an EMT, and mine that night was a woman about my age, and 6 months pregnant. Alex, as we'll call her, was about 5'2", incredibly non-threatening, and not a very pushy person. I'm 5'7" and at that time maybe 180, and I'm not a type A personality at all. Introverted and kind of a goofball, not overtly a take-charge authoritarian guy. I often joke that if I'm serious about something, something has gone terribly wrong. As we arrived there, I immediately knew something was very off. This was an older neighborhood, dating back to before World War II. The house was an old shotgun-style house, where the rooms are directly behind one another, so the living room would empty into a kitchen, which would empty into a bedroom. If a door was shut, the rest of the house was an unknown. The lights were off, other than the light from the blue strobes of the cop cars. There was a deputy at the door who said she was in the living room, but the deputies were all at their cars about 50 yards away on the main road. No one was doing first aid. The deputy said that the husband had said he had come home and found his wife laying face down on the floor and called the police. He said he knew his brother did it. The deputy warned me the husband seemed drunk and then vanished back to his car. As we walk in, we see no one around, no husband, which should have immediately raised a red flag. We found the woman between the couch and the living room table in the corner. The door to wherever was closed. We went to work on the woman. She was beaten to a pulp. Her nose deformed, her scalp was split open, and she was unconscious. She had areas of bruising all over her, some in various stages, another red flag. But there was work to do, and we set about stabilizing the woman and beginning the process of starting an IV and placing a neck collar to immobilize her. In our distracted state, we hadn't noticed the man step out of the bathroom. I had just placed the collar in an oxygen mask and was listening to her breath sounds when I heard the distinct click of a breakdown shotgun and footsteps. My partner was at the door with her back turned to get a stretcher off the porch, and I stood up straight to come face to chest with a nearly 6'2" man standing there, putting a pair of 12-gauge shells into the shotgun. He was African American, massively built, and drunk, with an angry scowl on his face.
"I'm going to get them,"
he would repeat, looking at me with this gaze that, if it could have killed, would have cut me in half. No emotion other than anger at all. You could smell the alcohol, and he was sweaty and jittery. It felt like a movie playing that I was watching. All that training of, if the scene is safe, get out, was rushing through my head. But at this point, I realized he would probably shoot me if I tried to run. As I stood up from his wife and kept my eyes locked on his, I said, "Alex, get out, now," and heard her scream as she must have turned around and saw him. "Alex, get out, now. I'll be fine," I repeated slowly, methodically, as I placed myself over his unconscious wife, between him and my pregnant partner. He stopped, stared me down, and pointed the barrel of the shotgun straight at my face as he did so. Again, no emotion, no concern, just anger and rage. Alex took off down the driveway, screaming for the deputies.
"I'm gonna kill them who did this. Get out of my way or I'll kill you too."
Cold as ice and with a growing and incredibly creepy smile, he said this. I thought this was a joke at first, someone's sick idea of a prank. "Oh, please don't miss," was my response with a laugh. He wasn't laughing. He just stared ahead at me, gun at his hip, pointed at my face. I replied, "If you shoot me, she's gonna die. I'm the only one who can take care of her," was my response. At this point, I was trying hard not to break down.
"She dies, you die,"
was his response. And he sat down on the recliner across from us. He still had that smile, that creepy, toothy smile with those white eyes bearing down on me. I had shivers going down my spine. I thought this was it. This was going to be how I died. All I could think about, as I worked to tokenly bandage these cuts on this woman's head, was how I was going to look up and suddenly feel and see nothing. My head would be hamburger meat. But then he lowered the gun and looked at his wife.
"My brother makes me do this. He made me do all that, you see? She was cheating on me. I had to. I didn't want to hurt her. She made me."
That same creepy grin, that same wide-eyed look, the same sweaty, trembling behavior. I was running out of things to do to keep this guy convinced I was busy saving her life. All of a sudden, I finally heard screaming and was blinded by flashlights. The deputies had been called back to the scene after they had left by my partner. When she realized they had gone looking for the brother, she called over the radio and had them come back. They stood there, guns drawn, yelling at the man to drop the shotgun. He did, and they threw him onto the ground and cuffed him. He started crying, screaming how she was dead, how it was his brother's fault, not his, and to leave him alone. Standing there, shaking, no, trembling, and wondering what just happened, we regained our composure, got our injured patient in the ambulance, and took her to the local trauma center. When we got back, a deputy took a report from us, and we had to file an incident report with our employer. We never heard anything after that. Fast forward to 2013 and I'm not working in the county anymore. While I occasionally see Alex and treat the whole incident as a joke, I don't really talk much about it. I never saw anything on the news about us and honestly never pushed the issue. I'm working for another service at this time and picking up a kid from that county's hospital when I see Alex and mention the event and ask whatever happened. She pulls me aside and tells me the rest of the story, and at that time, I realized more just how close I came to dying that night. The woman had regained consciousness a day after the attack and told the hospital staff that her husband had been drinking heavily that day and not taking his medicine. He had began accusing her of sleeping with his brother that night and had started hitting her until she had gotten knocked against the living room table and blacked out. He had eventually pled to the domestic violence charge and was placed in an inpatient psychiatric facility, and for all I know, he's still there. The creepy thing, his brother had died in 2002 in a car accident in another state. According to the wife, he took medication because he had lucid and intense hallucinations of his brother doing things to people and telling him what to do. The deputies knew the house had a history of mental illness calls and never warned us or flagged the address in our dispatch system. It raised more questions than answers. Why wasn't he charged with the attack on us? Why did the deputies leave us there? And why wasn't anything done on follow-up to help us? I'm a security guard. Yeah, I know the official title is security officer. What the hell ever, I like going by security guard instead. Not the point. So get this. I've been a security guard for going on 15 months, working mostly night shift. I'm a lot more seasoned, so to speak, than I was at the beginning. No. At the beginning I worked in a small town at a seasonal factory in a gatehouse that was about as big as 3 to 4 porta potties combined. A big window at the back and front with a door on the left and right side that were mostly glass. Now I mentioned the 2 windows and the 2 mostly glass doors because, as I said, I worked at night. And when the light in the gatehouse was on, bam! You could see me from the road, from the woods, from the lake. Didn't matter. Folks could see in. I couldn't really see out. It's not an ideal place that you want to be in, if you know what I mean. Didn't really help that it was sort of tucked back in the woods with a half-assed barbed wire fence around the plant. It just had a creepy enough feeling at night without anything going wrong, small town or not. The quiet could get you easily enough, if you let it. Anyway, let me get to the story. The phone rang one night. It wasn't common for me to get phone calls at night. Usually it was the factory manager / maintenance manager calling about wanting me to unlock the gates because of some routine something or other. But still, this was fairly rare. Still, it rang, and so I answered. This is Security Officer Woodall speaking. All I got was silence. Not like a "the phone isn't working" silence, but that palpable silence. Someone's on the other end and they haven't said anything silence. Then click. They hang up. Fine, whatever. Wrong number. Probably. Could have been. Wouldn't have thought much of it, but a few minutes later, I get called again. This is Security Officer Woodall speaking. Nothing. Just still that silence. That damn silence. Hello, can I help you? Is there anything I can do for you? Nothing. This person hadn't said a damn thing, but I know someone's there. I can hear just the faintest hints of them breathing. I don't know if it's creeping me out or pissing me off, but finally I hang up. I'm less than happy, but I like my job. I have to answer the phone regardless. This is Security Officer Woodall speaking. I'm expecting silence or the manager, honestly, at this point.
Why'd you hang up the phone? You shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, alright, it's gotten a voice. It was quiet but gravelly. It wasn't a child's voice or a teenager's, but a man's. A grown man's voice. But it was quiet, with a tone that was a mix between disdainful and scolding, telling me that I shouldn't have hung up. I'm not a small guy. I'm a good 6 foot tall, and at the time I was a lot heavier than I should have been. I'm still heavier than I should be, but then, damn. With that said, in my uniform, I even look a little bit intimidating. But there was something about this guy's voice that chilled me a little bit. Yeah, why's that? Yeah, real smooth. Nothing. Not a damned word, at first. And then
You'll see.
Before the phone got hung up. Needless to say, I went to my truck, I got my pistol, and I went back to my gatehouse before calling the cops. They couldn't find the guy, as the calls apparently came from a gas station's payphone up the road. This is a true story that happened to me a few years ago, I still get freaked out anytime I think about it, so let me share it. A few years ago, I was a supervisor for a security company. I worked in the patrol division. We would basically patrol various clients' properties through the night. We had business as well as residential. We also responded to calls from residents on the properties. Most were harmless, drunk, loud people, parties that get out of hand, etc. One night, I got a call about a suspicious person walking around some townhomes. This area is pretty quiet, surrounded by woods, and it was more middle class than most. After getting the notice, I arrive on property about 10 minutes later and drive to the area. I shut off my vehicle, leaving the orange light bar on, and take a look around. As I'm walking near the woods, I hear something walking not far from me. Now there are deer and other animals in those woods, but this one seemed to not only pace with me, but stop when I stopped. I shined my flashlight into the woods and did not see anything. Not finding anything unusual, I go back to my vehicle and write my report, just saying that it was probably kids messing around. I leave and go about my night. Around 2 hours later, we get another call. This time, the caller said someone was looking into their window, but could not give a description. I go back this time running with no lights on. I get out of my vehicle in a different area facing the woods. With the dome light disabled, I open the door, leaving it cracked, and proceed around the houses. Again, I did not find anything except a handprint on the window in question. I walked close to the woods on the way back to my vehicle. I was standing about 20 feet in front of my vehicle, but right by the woods. Suddenly, I hear a rough voice say,
"Hey, come here."
Thinking it was a prank, I said, "All right, you had your fun, but you're scaring the residents. Come out and talk to me." Again, I heard from the woods,
"No, you come here, and we will have some fun."
At this time, I am freaking out. It's dark. I'm alone, though the police are a phone call away. I tried to play it cool. I said, "Whatever, just stay off the property." I turn to go back when I hear someone in the woods moving. Then in a loud voice I hear,
"Don't turn your back on me. I said get in here or you will pay."
That was it. I was 100% scared. I turned fast, drawing my 9mm. As I did, pointing it in my flashlight into the woods, saying, "If you show your face, I am going to shoot. I'm calling the police." I didn't get a response. I went back to my vehicle, turning on all the lights, headlight, spotlight, and light bar, all of them shining on the woods. I called the cops. We are well known and generally liked by the police, so it only takes a few minutes to respond. They have me wait while they check the woods. A few minutes later, one calls over to me to come to him. There, 40 feet into the woods, is a nightmare. There is a homemade hunting blind set up, a shovel, a tarp, and a shallow pit. The police never found the person, and no one had seen him after that near the property. I still don't know what to make of it. Was it a harmless prank? Or a killer waiting for me in those woods? The 2 calls that night were made from a prepaid cell phone. All the residents said that they never made the calls, so I assume it was him. I quit my job shortly after that. Not really a scary thing, just a post of creepy stuff at where I work. I'm security at a National Guard base, an Army Aviation Support Facility to be exact. It's where the medevac unit is stationed. Me and the other guards have all had creepy stuff happen. The most recent are 2 things that happened. The first, we have a new guy. I show up to relieve him at midnight and he tells me that he was patrolling by the rotor shop and he hears a loud bang, like something heavy falls. He enters the double doors to investigate and everything is fine. He was pretty much jumped by it and spooked. The second, tonight I was doing a security check in the main building. I was investigating the second floor and everything seemed secure, so I went to patrol somewhere else. As I was walking to the stairwell, I heard about 10 feet behind me what sounded like walkie-talkie static. I was the only one in the whole building and it's dark, so I thought the other guard was toying with me. Then I realized there's no way because he had to watch the main gate and our radios don't make that sound. Needless to say, I clung to my sidearm and hopped out of there. It wasn't my radio because it was 10 feet behind me, and distinct enough that it made me turn with my flashlight pointed toward the sound and my right hand on my firearm. It may be extreme, but remember, it is dark, and to my knowledge I'm alone, so anyone snooping around besides security personnel isn't supposed to be there. In other words, they would have snuck in. Also, no sources for radio static nearby. Second floor is almost all office space, and it was shut down for the night.